One. All right, everyone, what's going on? This is Steven with AI Flow here with my guest, Patrick. Patrick, you're gonna have to share your last name with me because I hate butchering names here.
It's Patrick Renvoisé.
Oh yeah, I'm not gonna attempt that, but I love it. Anyways, guys, Patrick is the co-founder of SalesBrain, and just to give you some background information on him, he's co-authored two award-winning books, translated in over 12 languages, which is incredible. And more recently, he's going to chat a little bit more about this persuasion code and just kind of how SalesBrain, his company, was formed over 23 years ago. So I know his approach is a bit different than what we see, but I'm super excited to get more insight on him and just everything he's gone through in his entrepreneurial journey. So, Patrick, welcome to the show. I appreciate having you.
Good to be with you, Stephen.
Awesome. So I know we chatted just really quickly, but give the folks just kind of like a high level overview on what it is that you do and who are the type of clients that you serve.
Yes, so we are specialized in the science of human persuasion, and it came because I spent my life selling very expensive and very complicated stuff. I was a specialist in marketing and marketing of supercomputers. So supercomputers are very complicated; they are very expensive, and at the end of the day, I was always puzzled by the fact that although there is a science for a lot of different things, there is no real science for selling and marketing. I mean, marketing is trying to remove a lot of art of selling, but there was not a compelling model that tells you in a few steps what do you need to do if you want to persuade people. So about 25 years ago, after having a successful career in Silicon Valley, I decided I want to make my own contribution to the understanding of how people use their brain to make buying decisions. And it took me about 2 years of research. And I came into contact with the research of a very famous guy by the name of Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economy in 2002, and he wrote a book on it called Thinking Fast and Slow, whereby he demonstrated that human behavior can be explained by what he called system one, or what we call the primal brain. In other words, most people think that we have one brain, but in reality, Kahneman established beyond reasonable doubt that we have two brains. We have system one, which is the primal brain, it's the brain of instinct of survival. And we have system two, which is our rational brain, which makes us uniquely human and uniquely smart. However, Kahneman demonstrated that we still are under the tyranny of system one. In other words, we think we're smart, but we're not really smart because all our decisions are based on our instinct. And again, he got the Nobel Prize for his findings. So when I read his book, I went, well, if he's not completely wrong, then we have to rethink marketing to really appeal to that primal unconscious brain called system one. So it took me 2 years of research. We came up with a model for it, and we've been in business ever since. And we've been, training over 200,000 people on it, including about 20,000 CEOs, whereby we show people what they've been doing most likely without knowing it, but we have decoded the language of persuasion, if you want. And sorry, that was a long introduction.
No, that's perfect. No, I think it's super important for us to just really break it down in the most simple way because I know a lot of us, if my wife is ever watching and she sees something in Target, that emotional brain is going to be like, okay, honey, we need it. And then she's going to come home with a lot of things. So it's good to kind of understand the science behind things. And you said it did take a couple years of research to really get into the weeds of things. So for like the entrepreneurs out there, how would you guide them in terms of like starting? Because let's be real, the paycheck is not coming right away because you're doing a lot of research. So what advice would you give to them starting out?
So if you look at how this primal brain works, because it's an ancient brain, we share it with all vertebrates. So any animal that has vertebrae, in the middle of this vertebra, there is the spinal cord, and the brain is the termination of that nervous system, right? So the brain controls whatever comes in and out of all the sensors that we have in our body. So that primal brain is actually very simple in its working principle. In other words, there are only 6 ways you can trigger that primal brain. We call them stimulus. There are only 6 ways you can stimulate that brain. So what we have done is from those basic 6 stimulus, we have come up with a very simple 4-step process that everybody needs to master if they want to increase their probability to sell. Now, the steps are very easy. Again, there are only 4 of them, but they are questions, if you want. So the question is easy to understand, but getting the right answer to it is not that easy.
Hmm. Wow. You're already making my brain work. I'm like, I wonder what's being, absorbed and pushed out. Um, awesome. So clearly you've been in business for over 25 years in the industry. What are just some of the trends that you're seeing with your space? Because it seems like this space is very unique. I don't see a lot of people really doing what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, we're the only company in the world that's doing what we're doing. Um, the trend that we see is, of course, the arrival of AI.
Mm,
So right now, everybody is going, okay, how can I optimize my marketing because this agent AI or this AI agent is pretty smart. So I can probably improve my banners, my ads, my trade show messages, etc. So we've been working a lot with AI right now, but maybe I need to give you a very short overview of how that primal brain works and what are the 4 critical questions that people need to answer if they want to persuade, right?
yes,
So
absolutely.
very briefly, that primal brain can only be stimulated by impulses or stimulus that are personal, contrastable, tangible, memorable, visual, and or emotional. So these are the 6. So let me review very briefly what they mean. A stimulus must be personal. In other words, our primal brain is selfish and it's only worried about my survival. So it's always asking this question in the background, what's in it for me? How is that going to make my life easier, better, etc. The second stimulus is contrastable. It's a brain that does not really understand the level of a particular stimulus. It's the difference of level. In other words, if you hear a loud noise over a quiet background, it will make you jump. But if you hear the same loud noise over a loud background, your primal brain will not react, right? So it's about making sure that your message or your stimulus is contrasted. The third stimulus is tangible. In other words, it's a brain that's very ancient. It's about 500 million years old. By contrast, our neocortex is only about 10 million years old. So it's a brain that does not understand complex statements. In fact, it's a brain that is pre-verbal. It's a brain that does not even understand words. Why? Because words are not really tangible. They have to be processed by higher levels of the brain. So a stimulus needs to be simple. If I tell my customers, oh, our solution will provide you an easy to use scalable modular architecture, that primal brain will not understand it. It's way too abstract, way too complex. Now, the fourth stimulus is memorable. In other words, remember that usually your customers do not make the decision to buy right when you communicate your message, but they will wait a few seconds, sometimes a few days, a few weeks. If you have a very long sales cycle, if your sales cycle is 6 months, and when your customer makes that decision after the initial 6 months, it is not what you've told them right now which matters. It's what they remembered about all the messages that you have sent them throughout the time. Right? So you have to remember that it is not what you say right now which is important to trigger a decision. It's what they will remember at the moment they will make the decision. So your stimulus has to be memorable. And there are a lot of research and information that is important to understand if you want to know in the end what your customers will remember about any messages. The fifth stimulus is visual. Remember, I said that the primal brain is not a brain of auditory stimulus. In other words, words do not trigger it very easily. However, visuals trigger almost an instant reaction. Right? Visual stimulus typically are, it's hard to quantify this. I'm just going to throw a number at it, but about 50 times faster than auditory stimulus, right? Your
Mm.
visual nerve is only about 2 inches long. It sits right behind your eye, and it's high bandwidth connection between the eye and the decision maker. In fact, if I show you a brain here, I have my I just lost my brain in the manipulation. If you can see on my camera the brain right now,
Hmm.
the the optic nerve is plugging directly here inside system one of that primal brain. So a visual stimulus, I mean, in English, we say a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you study neuroscience, you would say a picture is worth 1,000,000 words, right?
Mm.
And the last stimulus is emotion. So all the advertising companies know this. It is not how impactful your message is from a rational perspective. It's how much emotion will be created in the brain that will give you a chance to really influence people. In fact, one of the greatest researchers on the subject is a guy by the name of Antonio Damasio. He's head of the neuroscience department at UC Irvine in California. And Damasio said, we are not thinking machines that feel. We are feeling machines that think once in a while. I mean,
Interesting.
he's like the utmost expert on the role of emotion in the brain. So it's not like emotions are optional. Emotion is the basic fuel that is needed by the brain to make a decision. There is no such thing as a rational decision. I mean, the rational brain influences to some degree the primal brain, but that influence stays very limited. Right? So again, you have only 6 ways you can stimulate that primal brain. The way you stimulate it, that stimulus needs to be personal, contrastable, tangible, memorable, visual, and or emotional. That's the 6 stimuli. Okay, so that's the world of neuroscience. And if we had 3 hours, I could spend 2 hours trying to see what those 6 stimuli really mean. But if you understand that and if you agree with that statement, then from those we can deduct the 4 questions or 4 steps that I mentioned before. So the fact that the brain is personal or need personal stimuli to be influenced means the first step in our process of persuasion is you need to diagnose the pain. So I'm going to give you the 4 steps and I'm going to review them one by one very quickly. You need to diagnose the pain. You need to differentiate your claims. That would be the question number 2. You need to demonstrate the gain. In other words, you're going to take your customers from a painful situation. You're going to bring them to a less painful situation if they buy your product or service. But you need to demonstrate that delta or gain. It's another way to say you need to demonstrate your value proposition.
Hmm.
And then the 4th step is you need to deliver to that primal brain. So again, let me repeat, you need to diagnose the pain, you need to differentiate your claims, you need to demonstrate the gain, and you need to deliver that message directly to their primal brain. So let's talk about diagnose the pain. What does that mean? So if you have a chance to do interaction with your customers and you need to ask them, what do you need or what do you want? I mean, in marketing, we always talk about what are the needs, what are the wants of the customer. And we say after doing all this research that those are important, but there is something even more important. It's what are the pains in our brain? In other words, what thoughts or states creates the most emotional, the strongest emotion, negative emotion in our brain, and we call that a pain. It's not really physical pain, right? It's more psychological pain.
Hmm.
But that pain is not obvious. And I want to give you a very simple example. Right? Now, imagine you sell home delivered pizza. What do you think is the number one pain of the average American consumers of pizza? In other words, what's the strongest negative emotion that floods their brain at the moment where they are thinking of buying a home delivered pizza?
They don't want to cook, right?
Right, they don't want to cook. I mean, they want an effective, quick ways to fix their hunger.
Hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
But that's not the number one thing.
Mm. What is?
Now, we know what people want. People might tell you, oh, I want extra pepperoni, I want garlic on my pizza. So people can, this is traditional marketing, right? Traditional marketing is about asking people, what do you want or what do you
Hmm.
need? But what we say is that there are some unconscious processes inside the brain of people. We call that pain, again, or negative emotion. Most of the time, people are not even aware that they have those. But those drive their ultimate decision to buy or not to buy later on. So any idea what number one pain could be?
Oh my gosh, I'm overthinking here.
Probably, yeah. You're overthinking, which means you're engaging your neocortex, and we're not interested in that. We want to know what your subconscious brain thinks about home delivered pizza.
Oh man, I feel dumb answering these questions.
Well, a lot of people say the pizza arriving cold, right?
Yeah, yeah. That was one of
Or
my thoughts, but
or receiving the wrong pizza, or the delivery guy would not have changed, or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, that's not really the right answer. The right answer is it is the anxiety of not knowing when the pizza will arrive.
Mm.
The anxiety, because by definition, you're hungry. So your primal brain is saying, feed me, feed me, feed me, right? There is a signal that's being sent from your stomach to your brain that says, if I don't get pizza in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to die. I mean, my survival brain says, I need to be fed right now. So the only way you can quiet that particular request is by making sure that you tell them when the pizza will arrive, right? That would eliminate their pain.
Hmm.
Well, knowing this, about 35 years ago, there was a small pizza shop in the area of Detroit, and they came up with a slogan, and their slogan was 30 minutes or less, or it's free. And that's a perfect cure to the pain. And guess what? That little pizza place, as you probably have guessed by now, is Domino Pizza, and they became
Hmm.
number one in the business. So, what's the morale of that story? The morale of the story is Domino is not in the pizza business. Right? They are a FedEx organization which happens to deliver pizza. The pizza is only an accessory to eliminate that pain of the anxiety of not knowing when the pizza will arrive. And it is not a concept that is reserved for the VP of marketing. Everybody knows that Nobby knows that they are in that business of eliminating the anxiety of not knowing. And that's why the drivers have a bonus, which is based on how often they get it on time. And they've built a complete organization whose unique purpose is to eliminate that pain. Now, the pizza might be only average, but the quality of the pizza is, sadly enough, not the number one pain in the US. Correct? All right.
Mm.
So, diagnose the pain means two things. It means if you have a chance to talk to your customers before they buy, it is more important that you listen to them as opposed to if you bombard them with all the benefits of your solution. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Diagnosing the pain. But the second learning of that step is that you cannot assume that you know the pain because when people tell you, I want pizza, in reality, their pain has nothing to do with the pizza itself. It's that anxiety of not knowing. Okay. So that's the first step. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of companies, including us, who have come up with a lot of methods to try to get to what is the real pain. Because a slice of pizza is a very simple product. And as you can understand, there is a huge disconnect between what people want and what are their needs. So if the product becomes more complicated, the shift of pain, the difference between the pain and the needs or the wants can be even greater. I can give you another example. There was a large company a few years ago called IBM. They were the only provider, I mean, not the only, but they were the main provider of computers and big computers. And amazingly enough, the pain of their buyers had nothing to do with compute power. And the slogan, it was not really a slogan because it was a more of a private message that people were saying about IBM. The mantra of IBM was, you never get fired from buying IBM or Big Blue. They used to be called Big Blue, right? So
Mm.
if you were the CIO of a large company like NASA or Boeing or a big bank or whatever, and you needed to buy a computer, your number one pain was most likely that you were afraid of getting fired of your job if you chose the wrong computer. And IBM was eliminating this because nobody ever gets fired from choosing them. Right? That was the mantra. Okay, so again, that's step number one, diagnosing the pain. Step number two is you need to differentiate your claims. What does that mean? Well, most likely you have competitors, and most likely those competitors are trying to eliminate the same pains that you're trying to eliminate. So the problem is there enough contrast between what your customer think they will receive if they buy from you, as opposed to if they buy from one of your competitors? But sadly enough, very, very few companies create enough contrast between their message and their competitors. And why do I say that? I say that because 98% of all websites start with the same sentence. 98%. You know what it is? If you look at the website of a company that's trying to sell a product or service, right, what is the message that they put forward? Most of them say, we are one of the leading provider of, and you finish that sentence. The problem is when you say that, you're saying, I'm just a red apple, right? And everybody else is a red apple because everybody is saying we are one of the leading provider of. And that is not enough. That does not create enough contrast. You cannot say that. You have to be able to say, we are the only provider of. And when you say that, that makes you appear like a green apple among red apples. Now, of course, it is very difficult because, for example, if you're delivering pizza, there is nothing much unique about your pizza because, you know, everybody can prepare a pizza. But Domino's found their uniqueness, or what we call a claim, is they do it in 30 minutes or less, or it's free. So if it is very difficult to differentiate your solution at the product level, you have to find something else outside of the product that will differentiate you. And I could go on and on about that concept of claim. I can give you just one or two more examples, but think about jeans, for example, right? I mean, Levi's invented the concept of jean 150 years ago, but today they have 100 competitors. So what is the message of Levi's today? How do they claim something unique? They keep saying, we are the original. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Nobody else created the jeans, right? Now, does that make it a reason good enough to buy? Well, think about all the branding that they create around that notion of being the original. Okay, so that's the second step. After you have diagnosed the pain, you need to differentiate your claim so that the people see the difference between you or your competitors. If you do not do this, unfortunately, you're dividing your probability to sell by the number of competitors that you have. Because if your clients choose randomly if they're going to buy your apple or the apple of your competitor, and if you have 50 competitors, you divide your probability to sell by 50. Because when everybody is a red apple, when people choose, it's completely random. Right? So if you want to put the odds on your side, you need to be able to say, we are the only provider of. And of course, that the question is easy, but finding an answer to that is very difficult. All right. So first step, diagnose the pain. Second step, differentiate your claims. Third step, demonstrate the gain. Now, why do you need to demonstrate the gain? Well, because everybody says, oh, if you buy my solution, we will save you $1 million next year. But I mean, there is no proof behind that. Right? So in our model, we've created a very simple matrix, which it's a two-dimensional matrix. On one side, it's the type of value. In other words, whenever somebody buys something from somebody else, the value that they derive can only be financial or strategic or personal. Right? So if I buy something from you, maybe I'm going to save money, I'm going to increase my own revenue, or it's going to make my business more competitive, so that's strategic value, or I'm going to be able to sleep better at night, I can be promoted, I can spend more time with my kids, etc. So that's personal value. So the idea is you need to maximize the amount of financial, strategic, and personal value that you present to your customers, right? Because if I sell something at if I sell something at a given price, and I sell glass at that price, the value proposition might not be very good. But if I'm giving you a diamond at that price, because people have a perception of the value of diamond being great, it's going to be a lot easier, right? So you need to maximize, again, the financial, strategic, and personal value. We say, great, you need to do that, but that's not enough. You also need to maximize the type of proof that you're using to do it. So, for example, if I told you, hey, Steven, you should buy my book. And if you buy my book, it will help you increase your revenue by 15% next year. There is no proof, and I'm the guy who wrote the book, so I'm probably very biased towards my book, right? Yeah. There is absolutely zero proof. So although I tried to quantify the value by saying increase your revenue by 15%, the proof that I'm presenting is very weak. In fact, non-existent. So we found that there are only 4 ways you can prove the value. So the best way to prove the value is to use a customer case. Right? So for example, if I'm trying to sell my book to you, instead of me saying it, imagine if somebody famous said, oh yeah, I read Patrick's book and I increased my revenue by 15% last year. Do you see how much more believable that will become to you, right? Because it's no longer me talking about it. It's now a demonstration of the value that you can expect.
Mm.
So the first best proof of value is a customer case. The second one is a demo. Demo as in using logic to demonstrate it. So for example, when Domino's said 30 minutes or less, they didn't stop there. They said, or it's free. And the or it's free becomes a demonstration now of the value proposition, right?
Mm.
So again, if you buy Domino's, you will not have any anxiety of waiting because it's 30 minutes or less. And oh, by the way, if for whichever reason they miss the delivery time, you will put $20 in your pocket because instead of paying for that pizza, they will give it to you for free. So do you see how they demonstrated the value now?
Yeah, 100%.
The third proof of gain is um, data. I mean, the problem with data is that it's very hard for the primal brain to understand data because it's not tangible enough. But you could use data to prove a value proposition. Let me give you an example. Imagine I sell very sophisticated manufacturing machines, right? And imagine my machine will allow you to build your gizmos 5% faster than what you're doing today. And imagine we can quantify that 5% faster of manufacturing and put a dollar sign to it. And that at the end of the day, it would save you $50,000 per year. Now I can start to build numbers that will lead to that $50,000 of saving that you would have next year. Now, of course, your brain would have to believe all the numbers that I'm giving you in the line. So it's not a great proof, but it's a pretty decent proof. And then the fourth type of proof is when you have no proof and you use your vision. Vision as in, trust me, Steven, I don't have any proof, but I'm going to tell you and I'm going to repeat to you, if you buy my book, you will increase your revenue by 15% next year. So again, four types of proofs: customer case, demo, data, vision, and three kinds of value: financial, strategic, and personal. So your whole objective when you communicate your value proposition is not just to talk about the value proposition, it's to demonstrate it. And better even than to demonstrate the value, you want to demonstrate the gain, which we define as the difference between value and cost. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The gain is what they will get financially, strategically, and personally, minus what your solution costs. And the cost might be financial, but there might also be a personal cost. For example, you may need to retrain some of your people. You may need to work harder at the beginning. You may have to read a book that's 300 pages long and you don't have 5 minutes to read. So all that is a personal cost, right? So again, after you've diagnosed the pain and you have differentiated your claims, you need to demonstrate the gain beyond reasonable doubt. So that's the first three steps. And answering those three questions of what's the pain, what's your claim, what makes you unique, and what is their gain, answering those three questions will help you define the what you should say. That's the content of your message.
Mm.
But the last step is, once you have created that message, how do you find a way to deliver it directly to their unconscious primal brain? And that's the 4 steps. That's the deliver to the primal brain. And that's over half of our book. So if you look at the model here, the first 3 steps are pretty easy: pain, claim, gain. But the last step is more complicated. I would have to go out in finer detail. This is where you would need to use 6 persuasion elements. And each of those elements can be further enhanced by using 7 persuasion catalysts. And the main element of this, by the way, are your proofs of gain. So the demonstrate the gain is right here in the middle of your message, and you need to find a way. All right. So again, that would take a much longer discussion to help you understand that part of the message, right? That part of the model. But in the end, we believe that persuasion is about those 4 steps: pain, claim, gain, primal brain.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, I know we're coming in on time over here, but no, I love that. I think everyone should get a copy of that book. I personally am gonna actually get a copy of that book myself because this was incredibly insightful. I feel like for myself, especially, just because being in like working with a lot of marketing companies, service-based businesses, etc., that's one of the big things that they want. So, I really urge everybody to just go grab a copy of this book. I think it'll be super insightful and would love to hear just what people's thoughts are. But a couple things, just last minute from as an entrepreneur, you've been doing this for so long. What are maybe some goals or some things that just kind of keep you going with the business side of things? Like, I'm really curious to know what like short-term goals you have for yourself, long-term goals, any challenges that you're having at the moment, just to help some of these entrepreneurs get going.
Sure. Well, just like every entrepreneur, we're always looking for more clients, right? Everybody wants more business.
Hmm.
In our case, we've been spending a lot of time understanding what AI means in all this process. And we are both excited and scared because persuasion is getting more and more effective. There is so much misinformation in the world there that at the end, we're going to ask people, don't trust anybody. Just make sure you check everything that people are saying. If I tell you, buy my book, you will increase your revenue by 15% next year, I would really encourage you to say, hey, Patrick, where does that 15% come from? Because you cannot trust anybody. And the problem is with AI is that a lot of these processes are going to be automated and they are going to become even more potent. So we are both excited about what AI will do and scared about the possible manipulation. Because the science of persuasion is ethical only to the degree that you're convinced that at the end of the day, your product and services will make the life of your customers better.
Hmm.
But if you sell weapons, for example, I would really question, are you sure that your weapon is going to make the life of your customers better? Maybe it will make the life of your customers better, but it will make the life of their enemies worse, right? So you need to make a real difficult decision on what is it ethical to do here when you're working on persuasion.
Love that. All right, everyone. Well, just last minute, Patrick, where can everyone find you if they want to get more information just about the Persuasion Code and just SalesBrain as a company?
Right. So the persuasion code is, available in any good library. It's on Amazon, and I have 3 free courses on LinkedIn education. So if you type the words the persuasion code, you will find 3 free courses. And the website of our company is salesbrain.com, SALES brain.com. And I have a LinkedIn profile, so I'm pretty good at answering emails.
Awesome. All right, Patrick. Well, this was incredibly insightful. Thanks so much again for your time. I feel like you're gonna just continue dominating the space, even with AI here. But thank you again so much. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, we'll connect soon.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right, have a good one.